Sign language. To be specific, ASL, American Sign Language, has been a passion of mine for a couple of years now. When I become interested in something and get pretty deep into it, I find that I kind of forget that not everyone is me, but end up talking to them as if they know everything I do. But not everyone knows those things about sign language. Actually, most people barely know anything about it. When I tell other people that I know some sign language, their initial reaction goes something like this. What? Sign language? Ooh, sign something! Sign my name! Say hi! After that initial shock, their next question comes. Wait, but isn't sign language only used by those people at the bottom of the news? What's the point of learning it? When people say that to me, I tend to tell them off and say that it's used in more places than in the news. I even tell them that it's the third most spoken language in America. Despite this, I can't actually blame the people who asked me that, because 3 years ago, if someone told me they were learning sign language, I know I probably would have said and done the same thing. This made me start to question our knowledge and perspective of sign language. How come this was all the majority of us knew of sign language? Has it just not been around for a long enough time? Before I go deeper into this, I want to tell you how I got into sign language. I don't actually have a relative who's deaf or part of the deaf community. About 3 years ago, I watched someone called Tegan Feldman signing along to music and found it cool. This is an example of some of the videos I saw. It's originally from an app called Musical.ly, but it was re-uploaded as a compilation video. I tried to learn sign by slowing down the video, pausing it every few seconds, and trying to copy what I saw. It worked to some extent, but I had no idea what I was even saying. For instance, if I did a certain gesture while the song was saying snow, I could only assume that the gesture meant that word. Now that I know some sign language, I can tell you that half the time that wasn't the case because of the different syntax of sign language. I continued like this for about 2 more months before I decided this wasn't working. I had to actually learn sign language. In the very beginning, I took a whole week just to learn the alphabet. Obviously, there are signs for specific words or phrases, but like you would with any other language, I chose to start with the alphabet. I practiced with both hands, though it's technically unnecessary, until I was completely comfortable. There's also a college professor called Bill Vickers who makes ASL teaching videos, and I watched a few episodes of that. Other than these two, I didn't specifically take any other ASL classes, but learned through translating songs, since it required me to search up words I never thought to look up on online and offline dictionaries. You could also find me fingerspelling, which means to sign the alphabet, every time I saw a street sign or a movie poster, anything with writing on it really. Once I started on my journey of ASL, I realized it was not as simple as just memorizing a few words and shoving them into a set sentence structure. I had to learn the facial expressions, the postures, their culture, and their community itself. I'm still learning and probably will be learning for a very long time. I've been studying on my own for 3 years, but I'm still not fluent. One of the major things that got me into deaf history was a revival version of a musical called Spring Awakening, done by the Deaf West cast. To give you a quick summary of the plot, it's based in 1891 in Germany, and it's the story of Wendla and Melchior, two star-crossed lovers and different teenagers trying to find their way through love and teenage sexuality. Seems like it has nothing to do with sign language, yes? But the directors, Michael Arden and Andy Mentis, managed to recreate the show using a mix of both hearing and deaf actors, as well as making sure the plot reflected the results of the Second International Congress on Education of the Deaf. So, there were 2 International Congress on Education of the Deaf, and both were conferences held to debate which approach of education, manualism or oralism, would be used to teach the deaf. First, let me clarify what exactly these 2 are. Manualism is basically teaching deaf students to sign, while oralism was teaching deaf students to lip read and to orally speak. The reason why the first conference is barely acknowledged is because only 28 delegates from 6 different countries attended. But the second one, which is also called the Milan Conference because it happened in 1880, Milan, Italy, it had 164 members from 8 different countries. This conference can be imagined as 2 different groups. You'll probably remember Alexander Graham Bell as the person who invented the telephone. So he was on the side of Team Oralism, and it was led by him and his European colleagues. On the other side was Team Manualism. It was led by Thomas Gallaudet, James Denison, and their US and British colleagues. To give perspective as to why they were on the side of Team Manualism, Thomas Gallaudet is the founder of American School for the Deaf, and he was later on also the name behind Gallaudet University, which is currently the world's only university designed to be barrier-free for deaf and hard of hearing students. An important thing to remember here is that James Denison was the only deaf delegate in this entire conference, even though it was a conference debating the future of deaf education. In the end, those who supported oralism won because they believed that the superiority of speech over signs would aid in restoring deaf mutes to social life, and that it would provide a greater facility of language. The idea behind it doesn't sound too bad. It might even sound like the most beneficial decision that could have been made for deaf people. But the impact of this decision was far more major than you might expect it to have been. Because of this conference, deaf teachers lost their jobs, and deaf people had to actually fight to keep their culture and language. Students were punished if they used signs in schools. They had to literally sit on their hands as they were forced to speak, even though some of them hadn't and could never hear a single syllable. Now, this was what was reflected in the musical that I mentioned beforehand. Moritz, portrayed as a deaf student in this revival version, is told off over and over again for not speaking vocally. If he tried to speak using sign language, he would be punished and forced to stay still. He experiences difficulties communicating with his family because people didn't listen to him just because he was deaf. This actually leads later on to a suicide. I couldn't help but wonder how things got to something like the Milan Conference. Back in 1000 BC, deaf people couldn't freely marry and they didn't have the right to own property. Aristotle said that those who were deaf, they were senseless and incapable of reason. Even Socrates said that they were incapable of language and ideas. But that was almost 3,000 years ago. From there, as time passed on, things seemed to have improved. People started to realize that being deaf didn't mean being dumb. And it doesn't mean that we can't think and comprehend things. Research and books were published on this. The American School for the Deaf was built, and it led to the spread of more schools for the deaf. And despite the support of oralism over the years by many people, they still taught fingerspelling along with oralism because they believed that this would help deaf people to integrate with the hearing society. This, I felt at least, seems like a setback on the journey that is deaf history. When something happens, like a fight between 2 people, don't we tell those people to give it time? That it will improve things between the 2 and hopefully make them cool down and maybe even accept each other's apology. We often say that time improves things, but this conference, it seems like a backtrack, not an improvement that happened in the history of deaf community despite all the time and effort that has previously happened. How can forcing everyone to orally speak and lip read, even against their will, and oppressing sign language be a decision made with the best interest of deaf students? Actually, I wasn't the only one who thought this way. Mary Thornley, she was born in Canada and attended the University of Washington. She did a project called The Enigma Unraveled, She Was a Native Signer, which was an exploration done to see the influence of deaf culture on art, past and present. She is currently an artist in residence in Gallaudet University, and this is a quote from her. "My goal is to leave a body of work that says deaf artist." In 1994, she created an artwork called Milan, Italy, 1880. What she said about the artwork was, "I choose this way of representing the oppressive attitude that existed towards sign language dating from the 1880s. And that the edict carried out in Milan, Italy in the 1880, that sign language would no longer be used with deaf children, but only oral methods, was still in force in the year I was born. This, I believe, was one of the more modern events that took the most time to recover from. Though we haven't completely recovered, I think we are taking the steps to get there. There were a few bumps along the way, of course. One being World War II, where 1,600 deaf people died at the hands of the Nazis. Another was a bit more of a turning point. It was called the Deaf President Now movement, and it was one of the events that happened in the 20th century that left a huge impact on deaf culture and history. It happened in 1988, meaning it took over 100 years to get from the conference to this movement. I found out about this movement while watching a TV show called Switched at Birth. The students of this deaf school, they take over a part of their campus because the government tried to shut down their school. The characters specifically refer to this movement of Gallaudet University. The Deaf President Now movement began initially with a new university president at Gallaudet. The Board of Trustees appointed a woman called Elizabeth Zinser to be the president, the only hearing candidate among all the others. Perhaps in this case it was because Zinser was the only hearing candidate, or maybe just years of there never having been a deaf candidate who was chosen to be president, even though there were many that were more than qualified. I don't know for sure, but whether there was a definite trigger or not, it started an uprising. The students of Gallaudet University seized control of the campus. They took up collections. They bought locks and chained the gates of the campus shut and locked themselves in. The students continued to march and campaign, demanding 4 things, and stated that they would continue until these demands were granted. These were the 4 demands. First, for Elizabeth Zinser to resign and reassign a new deaf president. Second, for James Billman, the chairman of the Board of Trustees during this time, to resign. Third, for 51% of the board to consist of deaf people. And lastly, no reprisals against all those who were part of the protest. These demands were not immediately met, of course. But at the end of the week, those who protested earned their victory. There was even a new and the first deaf president appointed, who was called Dr. King Jordan. The Milan Conference was something that took over 100 years to recover from. It is something that is still, in some ways, affecting the way that we perceive deaf people and their education. More time was needed to recover from this. Perhaps it was because it involved different countries and a contract of sort. A common decision was passed through several countries, and it took time to actually set these changes into place. But the impact, the aftermath, is lasting much longer. But on the other hand, we have the Deaf President Now movement, which managed to succeed within a week. Had the students not persisted till the end of the week, didn't believe their demands would be met and gave up, if they unlocked the gates and admitted defeat, who knows when Gallaudet would have had their first deaf president. However, despite this event having been something that happened in a much shorter time frame and in only one university, the impact is lasting just as long, if not longer, than the conference. Let's come back to the present. What do all of these matter to us? Well, we still have people who think that being deaf means being dumb. Just because someone is deaf doesn't mean they can't drive or work or study. We still have people who think waving their hands around is an acceptable behavior when referring to deaf people or sign language. We still have people who can only think of the interpreter at the bottom of the news when we hear the word deaf. We still have people who think using the word hearing impaired is right instead of deaf, when actually deaf is the right term and hearing impaired is offensive. Hearing impaired implies that one is lacking of something, that they have a problem. But I know this because I have looked into this. All these people that I've just described, the vast majority of them are not doing this to offend and genuinely hurt deaf people. They just don't know what they're doing and thinking is incorrect. I still don't know many things. Deaf culture is something that we're not exposed to very often, and there are biases that have been around for so long, and we grew up believing them because they were always around. But time has passed by, and I know the world is changing, even if it's doing very slowly. And how do I know this? Because a 14-year-old Korean girl who attends a school on a tiny island called Jeju, who previously only remembered the Korean Sign Language word for love, which she learned from kindergarten while terribly singing along to I Will, is standing here in front of you, telling you about the Milan Conference and the Deaf President Now movement, both of which most, maybe even all of you didn't know beforehand. Because that girl is me, and in the past 3 years, I've tried to translate roughly about 20 songs into sign language, all of which were slightly better than the one before, but still pretty bad. And I've gotten the chance to talk about this at my school and my boarding house twice, and gave a talk at the library where I told simple signs like please and thank you to my school teachers. I've been creating a musical using sign language because I was so inspired by Spring Awakening. I've watched a whole TV show called Switched at Birth only because I knew there was sign language in it. And I watched Spring Awakening with the Deaf West cast at least 5 times, and just about every clip on YouTube relating to it. The world has changed over the past billion years, and we have come to the point where me, a hearing person who looked into ASL out of mere curiosity, is here telling you the little bit I know about deaf culture in hopes of helping to spread the word a little. Maybe it'll take a really long time, but I think a future where this language that I've come to love because of its beauty and complexity is treated just like any other language, and hearing and deaf people can interact with each other without the biases that we are filled with now, it's a future I'm willing to wait for, even for 1,000,000 years. Thank you.